There's a particular flavor of worry that shows up around midlife, less the sudden panic of youth and more a low, persistent hum that colors decision-making, sleep, and relationships. This video will unpack why that hum exists, how biology and life context shape it, and what practical low-friction experiments you can run to turn down the volume. No medical pronouncements here, just clear explanations, relatable stories, and small steps you can test this week. Moving from that scene setting into the first practical observation, start by noticing the shape of your anxiety this week. The anxious edge in your 40s often feels different because it's quieter but more constant. Instead of dramatic, episodic panic, many people describe a background tension, an ongoing sense of vigilance, a repetitive low-level worry about responsibilities, or a persistent replay of what-if scenarios. That texture matters because it changes how you respond. Sharp panic often triggers immediate coping strategies. Breathe, ground, call a friend, while a constant low hum gets normalized and accepted as part of being responsible or mature. Naming the shape is the first intervention. When you can label whether your anxiety is episodic or tonic, you can choose appropriate tools. This week, try a simple check. 3 times a day, pause and silently label the feeling sharp, steady, or absent, and note what was happening just before. That data helps you distinguish true acute threats from habitual background worry and makes targeted practices far more effective. Bridge from noticing the texture to the changing content of worries in midlife. What you worry about in midlife tends to be different. Stakes are higher and fewer problems are neatly solvable. In your 20s, you might have worried about exams, dates, or getting a job concrete, time-bound challenges with clear actions. In midlife, the worry landscape shifts toward family, finances, health, and legacy areas where answers are often partial and action is long-term rather than immediate. The psychological effect is important. Unsolvable or partially solvable concerns breed chronic uncertainty, and our brains respond by replaying possibilities rather than settling. That replay loop feels exhausting because it never reaches a clean resolution. A useful exercise is to make a 2-column list tonight. Write down all current worries, then mark each as actionable or monitor only. Actionable items get one tiny next step assigned. Monitor-only items get a scheduled recheck date instead of constant mental review. This simple triage separates what you can move on from what you must live with for now and reduces the temptation to fixate on things outside immediate control. Flowing from content to mechanism, let's zoom into the body because biology amplifies midlife anxiety in persistent ways. Chronic low-level anxiety in midlife often rewires stress systems, sleep, and attention, so the baseline tension becomes self-sustaining. Years of repeated stressors and the accumulation of responsibility can change how the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis responds, altering cortisol rhythms and making the system more sensitive to minor triggers. When cortisol stays elevated at odd times, sleep becomes fragmented and less restorative, and poor sleep feeds back into worry. Tired brains ruminate more and have less cognitive bandwidth to tolerate uncertainty. Autonomic balance matters too. Lower vagal tone reduces the nervous system's natural ability to down-regulate arousal, making it harder to recover from small stressors. There's also an inflammatory pathway. Chronic stress correlates with low-grade systemic inflammation, which can worsen mood and amplify anxiety symptoms. None of this is intended to be fatalistic. The point is to show that midlife anxiety often has a bodily signature, which means interventions that target sleep, breathing, and gentle movement can change the baseline. Consider a 2-week body-focused experiment. Stabilize your wake time, practice 5 minutes of paced breathing each morning and evening, and keep a sleep log. Track perceived baseline tension daily. When people commit to these small, consistent changes, many report a noticeable lowering of the hum because physiology becomes less reactive, not because their life problems vanished. From physiology, we move to how thinking patterns solidify anxiety in midlife. Cognitive shifts, slower processing speed, stronger intolerance of uncertainty, and practiced rumination make worry stickier as you age. As processing speed subtly changes with age, ambiguous situations can feel harder to resolve quickly, and that uncertainty can radicalize into sustained mental loops. Habitual rumination becomes efficient. The mind learns a pathway and takes it without permission. Intolerance of uncertainty also grows, because the potential consequences of mistakes often feel more consequential. Financial missteps, relationship ruptures, health choices. This combination turns anxiety into a default mode. The brain rehearses scenarios because rehearsal feels adaptive, even though it feeds worry rather than solving problems. A practical countermeasure is targeted exposure to uncertainty. Pick a small, low-stakes question you would normally try to resolve immediately, and practice sitting with the ambiguity for 10 minutes without solving it. Do this once daily for a week and note whether your urge to ruminate diminishes, because tolerance of uncertainty is a muscle that responds to practice. Linking thought patterns to social context, midlife social mirrors change, and that shapes anxiety too. Social comparison and curated online lives make second-guessing louder when you're judging long-term trajectories. Midlife often clarifies where you stand relative to peers. Career plateaus, family differences, or financial snapshots become more visible. Social media amplifies this by presenting filtered highlight reels that encourage comparison at a time when many people are already evaluating progress and legacy. That social mirror can turn inward critiques into persistent worry. Am I doing enough? Did I make the right choices? Should I pivot? One concrete habit to reduce the noise is a temporary social feed audit. For 7 days, unfollow or mute 2 accounts that spike comparison and subscribe to 1 account that models realistic process rather than polished success. Notice if the internal critic softens when you remove constant curated benchmarks and replace them with more grounded perspectives. From social pressure to behavioral loops, midlife anxiety often maintains itself through avoidance and safety behaviors. Avoidance reduces immediate discomfort but prevents corrective learning and reinforces the anxious map. When we avoid feared situations or implement safety behaviors over planning, excessive checking, or delegating decisions, we get short-term relief. The problem is that avoiding removes opportunities to learn that the feared outcomes are often less catastrophic than predicted. Over time, the avoidance network strengthens, making anxiety feel persistent and rationalized as responsibility rather than avoidance. Cognitive behavioral strategies provide a solution: graded exposure and behavioral experiments. Choose one mildly feared task this week, sending an important but non-urgent email, making a phone call you've postponed, or attending a small social event, and break it into 2 or 3 tiny steps. Do the first step twice, then reassess. The goal is not to eliminate anxiety instantly, but to accumulate evidence that you can act in its presence and that catastrophic predictions are rare. Turning from behavior to ecology, social supports and loneliness often quietly amplify midlife anxiety. Friend circles thin, caregiving demands isolate, and workplace structures may remove casual social buffering when you need it most. Midlife frequently reduces incidental social contact, less shared leisure with peers, fewer spontaneous coffee chats at work, and constrained time from caregiving or career demands. Those casual contacts matter because they provide low-cost emotional offloading and perspective. When those buffers thin, anxieties have fewer places to land and amplify in private. Rebuilding casual supports can be low effort. Reach out to one acquaintance this week with a short, curiosity-driven message. Invite someone for a brief walk, or join a microgroup based on a hobby. Small, repeatable rituals, weekly calls, neighborhood walks, or rotating potlucks create predictable social architecture that reduces the isolation premium currently paid on worry. Now, let's synthesize practical, midlife-friendly interventions that combine sleep, movement, social design, and cognitive work into a usable plan. Effective approaches are hybrid: short physiological resets, structured social rituals, and targeted cognitive practices work better together than alone. Start with sleep stabilization. Set a consistent wake time and a 90-minute evening wind-down window where screens are reduced and dim light signals bedtime. Add 2 brief high-impact movement sessions per week, 10 to 20 minutes of strength-focused work or vigorous walking, which supports mood and improves vagal tone. Include a daily 5 to 10-minute worry scheduling practice. Give anxious thoughts a defined 15-minute slot later in the day so they stop hijacking mornings. Build a weekly social scaffold: 1 scheduled call, 1 brief communal activity, and 1 unstructured hang that's low pressure. Finally, pair these behaviors with cognitive techniques. Label the shape of your worry, do a mini uncertainty exposure daily, and run 1 graded exposure per week. A practical template to try for 30 days. Steady wake time, 5-minute morning breathing, 2 20-minute movement sessions, daily 10-minute worry slot, and 1 weekly social ritual. Track mood, sleep quality, and the daily baseline tension to see if the hum diminishes. These integrated practices address both the body and the mind, which is what midlife anxiety usually requires. Finally, reframe midlife anxiety as a signal rather than a verdict and treat it with curiosity and small experiments. Seeing anxiety as information about sleep, social architecture, boundaries, or values turns it into an opportunity for recalibration rather than a condemnation of character. Midlife often brings necessary adjustments: new role balances, different social needs, and physiological shifts. Framing anxiety as a prompt to test and tinker rather than proof you're failing changes the motivation for action into curiosity. Choose 3 small experiments right now. Stabilize wake time, schedule 1 social call, and commit to 1 graded exposure. Try them for 30 days, treat results as data, and iterate. If you find persistent, worsening symptoms, significant sleep loss, impaired daily functioning, or sudden mood decline, seek professional input. For everyday low-level midlife worry, these combined modest steps are surprisingly effective and quietly empowering. If this felt useful, subscribe or follow for more practical, experiment-based approaches to living with less anxiety and more agency.